On his birthday, a billionaire was denied a table, and he thought that was the worst part of his night. He was wrong. What happened next didn't just change his evening. It quietly rewrote 3 lives. Before we begin this heartwarming journey, tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more stories that remind us where real wealth truly lives. Thomas Bennett turned 38 that night with one simple wish: to disappear. Not in a dramatic way. Not the kind of disappearance that made headlines or worried shareholders. He simply wanted to fade into the background for a few hours, to exist without expectations, without applause, without the constant hum of people needing something from him. No gala. No champagne towers. No carefully rehearsed toasts about vision and leadership. Just food. Quiet. Anonymity. It shouldn't have been difficult. Thomas stepped out of his car and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking at the restaurant in front of him. Warm light spilled through tall windows. Laughter floated out every time the door opened. Inside, people leaned toward one another, glasses raised, faces relaxed in a way he rarely saw anymore. The sign above the entrance glowed softly, elegant without being loud. The place had been open barely a month and already had a waiting list longer than some of his business meetings. He hadn't planned to come here. Planning felt like work, and tonight, he was done with work. He'd left the office later than he intended, ignored the string of messages lighting up his phone, or when driven without direction, until the restaurant appeared in front of him like a promise. For once, he had allowed himself to hope. Inside, the air smelled like roasted garlic and fresh bread. Conversations overlapped in a low, pleasant murmur. The host, a young man with neatly combed hair and a professional smile, looked up as Thomas approached. "Good evening, sir. Welcome. Do you have a reservation?" "No," Thomas said easily. "Just one table for one." The host's fingers moved across the screen of his tablet. His smile didn't fade, but something in it tightened. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully booked tonight." Thomas blinked. Once, twice. "Completely?" he asked, glancing past the host. He could see at least 2 empty tables, chairs untouched, napkins folded with precision. "Yes, sir." "For now?" Thomas pressed. "I won't be long." The host shook his head gently, like someone delivering bad news they'd already repeated 100 times that night. "Reservations only. We do have a waiting list." "How long is the wait?" The host checked again. "Roughly 2 hours." Thomas almost laughed. 2 hours. In boardrooms, time bent around him. Meetings ran long because no one dared interrupt him. Schedules shifted because his priorities came first. Entire projects waited for his approval. But here, none of that mattered. "I see," Thomas said quietly. He stepped back, already reaching for the door, telling himself it was fine. He could eat anywhere. He could go home. He could order something bland and forgettable, and call it a night. He had just turned away when a voice cut through the noise behind him. "Excuse me." It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention.
"Excuse me,
but
sir.
it was confident in a way that made him stop.
Needed.
Yes, please.
"You can sit with us."
Thank you, I'd love to.
Thomas turned. At a small table near the window sat a woman with her hair pulled back in a simple style that suggested practicality over fashion. Her posture was relaxed but alert, like someone used to being responsible for more than just herself. Across from her sat a little girl, no older than 6, swinging her legs under the table and watching Thomas with open curiosity. "There's an empty chair," the woman continued, "and honestly, my daughter has been asking questions for the last 20 minutes. Another adult might save me." The girl nodded solemnly. Very important questions. Thomas hesitated. The host beside him looked frozen, as if this scenario wasn't covered in the training manual. "I don't want to intrude," Thomas said. "You won't," the woman replied without hesitation. "We already ordered. It's going to be a while." The girl leaned forward, resting her chin in her hands. "We don't bite." "Sometimes," she added thoughtfully, "but only when I'm very hungry." The woman sighed. "Nora." "What?" "It's true." Something loosened in Thomas's chest. He didn't recognize the feeling at first. It took him a second to realize it was amusement, real, unguarded amusement. "I'm Thomas," he said finally. "Mary," the woman replied. "And this is Nora." Nora tilted her head, studying him with unsettling focus. "It's your birthday." Thomas froze. "How did you know?" "You look disappointed," Nora said simply. "And people usually look like that on their birthdays when they expect more." Mary winced. "She's very observant." Thomas laughed. It surprised him how easily it came, yet how natural it felt. The sound seemed to echo inside him, unfamiliar, but welcome. "Well," Mary said, gesturing to the chair, "before she starts asking you about your childhood fears, you should sit." Thomas glanced once more toward the door, then back at the table. The street outside looked cold and indifferent. Inside, there was warmth, noise, life. He pulled out the chair and sat down. Just like that, the night shifted. Dinner unfolded in a way Thomas hadn't experienced in years. Nora asked him why he was alone, whether he liked animals, and if he ever smiled at work. Mary apologized constantly, though her eyes sparkled with quiet humor as she listened to her daughter's relentless interrogation. Thomas answered honestly where he could, and vaguely where he couldn't. He said he worked in business. He didn't say how much, as he didn't say where. For once, no one seemed to care. Mary spoke about juggling shifts, about learning how to stretch a budget, about discovering strength she didn't know she had. She spoke without bitterness, without drama, just facts. For the first time in a long while, Thomas wasn't Thomas Bennett, billionaire CEO. He was just a man eating dinner. At one point, the waiter passed by, smiled warmly, and said, "It's nice seeing families dine together." Nora corrected him immediately. "He's not family. He's just lost." The table erupted in laughter, and somewhere between the shared jokes and the quiet moments, Thomas realized something unsettling. He didn't want the night to end. He didn't know it yet, but sitting at that table, denied a reservation, invited by a stranger, questioned by a child, was the first step into a story far bigger than himself. A story that would test trust, challenge pride, and redefine what it meant to belong. And that was only the beginning. Thomas didn't remember the last time he'd eaten a meal without checking his phone every few minutes. The device sat face down on the table now, silent, forgotten. Somewhere between Nora's declaration that she didn't trust adults who hated animals and Mary's soft laughter at that pronouncement, the noise of the world he knew had faded into the background. "So," Nora said, folding her arms on the table with exaggerated seriousness, "why were you alone?" Mary shot her a look. "Nora." "What?" Nora shrugged. "It's a normal question." Thomas smiled. "I suppose it is." "Well," she pressed, "everyone else here has people." Thomas glanced around the restaurant. Couples leaned toward each other, families passed plates back and forth, friends clinked glasses. For a moment he felt exposed, like someone had pulled back a curtain he hadn't realized was there. "I work a lot," he said finally. "That's not an answer," Nora replied instantly. "My mom works a lot too, but she still eats dinner with me." Mary hid her smile behind her glass. "She's not wrong." Thomas laughed softly. "I guess I haven't learned how to balance things very well." Nora considered this. "You need practice." Mary raised an eyebrow. "You're giving life advice now?" "I'm very experienced," Nora said. "I'm 6. "That explains everything," Thomas said, earning himself a proud nod. The waiter arrived with their plates, setting them down carefully. Steam rose from the food, rich and inviting. Thomas took a bite and paused, genuinely surprised by how good it tasted. He hadn't realized how hungry he was, not just for food, but for this, for normalcy. "So," Mary said, cutting Nora's food into smaller pieces, "you said you're in business." "Yes." "What kind of business?" He hesitated. Old habits kicked in, the instinct to deflect, to keep answers broad enough that no one could pin him down. Investments, he said. Mary tilted her head slightly. That sounds vague. It's a skill I've developed. Nora leaned closer. Is it legal? Mary choked on her drink. Thomas laughed. Yes, very legal. Okay, Nora said. That's good. Mary shook her head. I apologize in advance. She asks whatever comes into her head. I like that, Thomas said honestly. It's refreshing. Mary studied him for a brief second, as if deciding whether to believe him. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded and returned to her food. I work at a clinic, she said casually. Long hours, not much pay, lots of chaos. What kind of clinic? Thomas asked. Veterinary. Nora perked up. Mommy saves animals. Mary smiled. That's one way to put it. That's impressive, Thomas said. It's work, Mary replied. Someone has to do it. There was no false modesty in her tone, no attempt to impress. Just truth. Thomas found himself admiring that more than he would have any polished resume. The conversation flowed easily after that. Nora asked Thomas if he liked dogs or cats better, declared that cats were suspicious, and informed him that anyone who didn't like animals was probably a villain. Mary countered with the argument that some villains had pets, which led to a heated debate that Thomas had the good sense not to interrupt. At one point, the waiter returned to check on them. He glanced at the three of them, smiled warmly, and said, It's really nice to see families enjoying dinner together. The word lingered in the air. Thomas felt a strange tightening in his chest. Mary stiffened almost imperceptibly. Before either adult could respond, Nora spoke up. We're not a family, she said matter-of-factly. He's just a stranger who couldn't get a table. The waiter flushed red. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean... It's fine, Mary said quickly, waving it off. No harm done. The waiter nodded and hurried away. An awkward silence followed. Thomas cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I didn't mind. Mary glanced at him. Well, still. Nora frowned. Why is that awkward? Mary sighed. Because words matter, sweetheart. Oh, Nora said, then brightened. Okay, but he's nice. Thomas felt warmth spread through him at the simple endorsement. Dinner continued, lighter now, the earlier moment fading into humor. Nora launched into a detailed story about her school day that involved a missing crayon, an unjust accusation, and a dramatic reconciliation. Thomas listened, genuinely captivated, asking questions that made her beam. At some point, Mary leaned back in her chair, watching the two of them with an expression Thomas couldn't quite read. What? He asked. Nothing, she said. You're good with her. I don't have much experience with kids. Nora snorted. You're doing fine. Mary smiled. She's a tough critic. I can tell. The check arrived sooner than Thomas expected. He reached for it automatically. I've got it, he said. Mary shook her head. No. It's my birthday, he offered. That doesn't mean you pay for strangers, she replied calmly. I handle my own bills. There it was. The line she wouldn't cross. Thomas studied her for a moment. There was no defensiveness in her refusal, no edge, just certainty. He nodded. All right, he said. Then we'll split it. That I'll accept. Nora raised her hand. Who pays for me? I do, Mary said. Like always. Nora sighed dramatically. Being a kid is very limiting. They stood to leave, and Thomas was struck by a sudden, unexpected reluctance. The night had passed too quickly. For once, time hadn't dragged or demanded anything from him. It had simply been. Outside, the air was cool and fresh. Streetlights cast a soft glow over the sidewalk. Music drifted faintly from somewhere down the street. Mary adjusted her bag on her shoulder. Well, she said, thank you for joining us. No, Thomas replied. Thank you for inviting me. Nora looked between them. So, now what? Mary smiled at her. Now we go home. Thomas felt something twist inside him at the thought. He watched as they started to walk away, Nora skipping ahead, Mary calling after her to be careful. The sight felt oddly significant, like the end of something he hadn't known he wanted. And as he stood there, alone on the sidewalk again, one thought settled heavily in his mind. He didn't want the night to end. Not yet. Thomas stood on the sidewalk longer than he meant to. Mary and Nora had already taken a few steps away from the restaurant, Nora hopping from one square of pavement to the next like the ground itself was a game she intended to win. Mary called after her gently, a practiced calm in her voice that suggested this was not her first rodeo. Thomas watched them go and felt the pull. He didn't know what it was exactly. He only knew that the quiet he'd craved all day suddenly felt empty instead of peaceful. Mary glanced back, noticing he hadn't moved. "You okay?" "Yeah," Thomas said, then hesitated. "Actually, would you mind if I walked with you for a bit?" Nora stopped hopping and turned around immediately. "You should," she declared. "It's dangerous to walk alone at night." Mary raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" Nora nodded gravely. "You might get lost." Thomas smiled. I wouldn't want that." "All right," Mary said after a beat. "We're heading toward the square. There's usually music." "That sounds good," Thomas said, surprised by how much he meant it. They fell into an easy rhythm as they walked. Savannah at night felt like a secret shared only with those willing to slow down. Street lamps glowed amber against old brick buildings. The air was warm but forgiving, carrying the scent of coffee and something sweet he couldn't quite place. Nora skipped ahead, humming a tune she made up as she went. "She does that," Mary said softly. "Makes her own music." "It's catchy," Thomas replied. "She's convinced she'll be famous someday." "I believe it." Mary laughed quietly, the sound light but layered. "You don't even know her." "I've met enough people who try too hard to be important," Thomas said. "She doesn't seem like one of them." Mary glanced at him, curiosity flickering across her face. "You're observant, too." "Maybe I'm learning from her." They walked in silence for a moment, the comfortable kind. Thomas realized how rare that was, silence that didn't demand filling, didn't itch with expectations. "Mom," Nora called from ahead, "there's a cafe." Mary smiled. "Of course you noticed." "It has lights," Nora explained. "That means it's good." The cafe sat on the corner, windows glowing warmly, tables scattered along the sidewalk. It looked like the kind of place that stayed open late because it liked people, not because it needed the business. "Hot chocolate?" Nora asked hopefully. Mary pretended to consider it. "It is a school night." Nora clasped her hands together. "With marshmallows." Mary sighed. "You drive a hard bargain." Thomas chuckled. "I'll join, if that's okay." Mary nodded. "You don't have to ask." Inside the cafe hummed softly, exposed brick walls, mismatched chairs, the low murmur of conversation. They found a table near the window. Nora climbed into her seat with purpose. "One hot chocolate with marshmallows," she told the server confidently. Mary ordered coffee. Thomas went with espresso. "Strong?" Mary asked. "It keeps me honest," Thomas said. Nora leaned forward, resting her chin in her hands. "You both look tired." Mary laughed. "Do we?" "You make the same face," Nora said. "Like you're thinking too much." Thomas met Mary's eyes, surprised. For a moment they both smiled, caught. The drinks arrived. Nora attacked her hot chocolate immediately, emerging seconds later with a marshmallow mustache. Mary snapped a quick photo on her phone. "For the memories." Nora grinned. "I look important." "You always do," Mary said. Thomas watched them, something warm settling in his chest. This ease, this affection, felt like stepping into a room he hadn't known existed. "Can I ask you something?" Mary said after a while. "Of course." Why did you really want to spend your birthday alone? Thomas considered brushing it off. He'd done that all evening. But the cafe, the lights, the quiet laughter, it felt like a space where honesty might survive. Because pretending gets exhausting, he said. I spend most of my time in rooms where people want something from me. Tonight, I didn't want to owe anyone, or be owed. Mary nodded slowly. I understand that. Nora looked between them. I don't like pretending. That's probably wise, Thomas said. And Mary smiled faintly. Before Nora, I went to everything. Every invitation. Every event. Then she came along, and suddenly staying home felt like the better choice. Did people understand? Thomas asked. Not really, Mary said, but I stopped explaining. Nora yawned, a big one that swallowed her whole face. I'm not tired, she announced immediately afterward. Of course not, Mary said gently. Your eyes are just resting. Thomas checked the time. It was later than he'd realized. Too late, probably. I should let you get home, he said, though the words tasted wrong. Mary nodded. Tomorrow comes early. They paid at the counter and stepped back outside. The night had cooled, and Nora snuggled closer to Mary. As they reached the sidewalk, Nora stopped suddenly. Wait, she turned to Thomas. Says, do you have a phone? Yes, Thomas said cautiously. We need your number. Mary blinked. Nora, what if we want to see him again? Nora pressed. You liked him. Mary flushed. I did not. You laughed, Nora said. That counts. Thomas hid his smile. I don't mind giving it. Mary hesitated, then sighed. All right, but no pressure. No pressure, Thomas agreed. They exchanged numbers quickly. Nora supervised closely. Saved? She asked her mother. Yes, Mary said. Good, Nora said, satisfied. Now we can go. They said their goodbyes a moment later. Thomas watched them walk away again, this time with something new in his pocket and something lighter in his chest. Before we continue, if this story is warming your heart, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support truly helps keep stories like this coming. The next morning, Thomas's phone buzzed while he was in the middle of a meeting. He glanced down. A message from Mary. Actually, no, from Nora. Coffee at 3? Same place. Only if you don't have plans to be alone. Thomas stared at the screen. Then, for the first time in years, he closed his laptop mid-meeting and smiled. Thomas canceled the meeting without hesitation. He didn't announce it, didn't justify it, didn't even apologize beyond a brief, something personal came up. His assistant paused on the other end of the line, clearly surprised, but Thomas had already ended the call. He stared at his phone for a long moment afterward. Coffee at 3? Same place. Only if you don't have plans to be alone. He should have said no, and he had a full calendar. A board review. Numbers that needed his attention. A routine that had kept his life perfectly ordered and emotionally distant for years. Instead, he typed back, I'll be there. At 2:45, Thomas arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early and immediately regretted it. He sat at a small table by the window, pretending to read emails he had no intention of answering, glancing up every time the door opened. When Nora burst in first, hair bouncing, eyes scanning the room, he felt something unexpected lift in his chest. You came, she announced, racing toward him. I said I would, Thomas replied. Adults don't always mean that, Nora said wisely. Mary followed close behind, slightly out of breath. Nora, we talked about running ahead. I saw him, Nora said simply. He looked lonely. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Did I? A little, she confirmed, but less than yesterday. Mary smiled apologetically. Sorry, she's very honest. I'm starting to see that, Thomas said, smiling back. They slipped into something that felt disturbingly easy. Coffee became a habit. Not every day, Mary insisted on boundaries, but often enough that Thomas began to recognize the barista by name. Parks followed cafes, quiet walks, loud laughter. Nora invented games that made no sense but demanded full participation. One afternoon, Thomas found himself crouched in the grass of a small park, helping Nora search for the perfect leaf. "What makes it perfect?" he asked. "It has to look like it belongs somewhere special," she said. Mary watched from a nearby bench, arms folded loosely, eyes thoughtful. "You don't have to indulge her every whim," she called out. I want to," Thomas replied without thinking. The words lingered. He wanted to. That realization unsettled him more than he expected. For years, Thomas had moved through life efficiently. Meetings, deals, decisions. Everything had a purpose. But here, nothing was productive in the way he understood productivity. And yet, he felt fuller than he had in a long time. Mary noticed the changes before Thomas did. He listened differently now, asked questions without glancing at his watch, laughed without restraint. He wasn't performing. He wasn't posturing. He was present. Still, Mary kept a careful distance. She never asked about his job beyond polite curiosity, never hinted at expectations. When he offered to pay for things, she declined with quiet firmness. Independence mattered to her, and Thomas respected that, even when it frustrated him. One evening, as Nora played nearby, Mary spoke softly. "She's growing attached." Thomas nodded. "I know." "You understand why that worries me," Mary continued. "I do," he said. "I'm not trying to replace anything." Mary studied him. "Then why are you here?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was honest. Thomas took a breath. "Because I feel human when I'm with you." Mary looked away, lips pressed together, considering. "I don't want promises," she said. "I don't want explanations that sound good today and disappear tomorrow." "I wouldn't do that," Thomas replied. "I know," Mary said quietly. "That's what scares me." Nora interrupted them then, barreling into Thomas's side. "Come push me!" He stood without question, jogging toward the swings. Mary watched them, her expression softening despite herself. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, slow and cautious. Days passed. Weeks began to blur. Thomas started blocking off time without labeling it. Meetings shifted. Calls were delayed. For the first time in years, his life wasn't dictated solely by obligation. One afternoon at the playground, Nora climbed the jungle gym with dramatic flair. "Look," she shouted. "I'm very high." "You're also very breakable," Mary called back. Thomas laughed. "She's fearless." "She didn't always used to be," Mary said. Something in her tone changed. "Her father," she started, then stopped. Thomas waited. "He left when she was 2, Mary said finally. "No warning, no goodbye. Just gone." "I'm sorry," Thomas said softly. Mary shrugged. "I stopped expecting apologies from people who already left." Nora slid down the slide with a triumphant yell, oblivious. Thomas followed her movement, then noticed something else. Across the park, near the path, a man stood still. He wasn't playing. Wasn't passing through. He was watching. Mary noticed Thomas's gaze and turned. Her face went pale. "Nora," she said quickly. "Come here." The man didn't move, and suddenly the easy rhythm of their new routine fractured. Something from the past had found them. Mary's hand tightened around Nora's wrist. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice calm in a way that fooled no one who knew her. "Let's go get some water." Nora looked up at her mother, confused. "But I'm not thirsty." "I am," Mary replied, already guiding her away from the swings. Thomas followed without asking. He didn't need an explanation. He could feel the shift in the air, the way the lightness of the afternoon had fractured into something sharp and uneasy. The man across the park hadn't moved. He stood near the path with his hands in his jacket pockets, posture relaxed in a way that felt rehearsed. He wasn't looking at the playground in general. His eyes were fixed on Nora. And then, as if sensing Mary's attention, he smiled. Mary stopped walking. Her shoulders went rigid like a shield snapping into place. "Nora," she said quietly, "go sit on that bench, right there." Nora obeyed instantly. The easy confidence she usually carried was gone, replaced by a tight, uncertain expression Thomas hadn't seen before. Mary turned to face the man. Richard," she said. "So that was his name." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. Richard approached slowly, his smile widening as he came closer. He was taller than Thomas expected, and with dark hair and features that might have been handsome, if not for the arrogance etched into them. "Mary," Richard said warmly, like they were old friends running into each other by chance. "It's been a long time." Mary didn't return the smile. "You don't get to say that." Richard chuckled. "Still sharp. I missed that." Nora shifted on the bench, hugging her knees. Her eyes flicked between the adults, then landed on Thomas. She stood and hurried over, pressing herself against his side. Thomas stiffened, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Richard's gaze snapped to him. "And you are?" Richard asked. "A friend," Thomas replied evenly. Richard raised an eyebrow. "That so?" Mary stepped forward. "This isn't the time." "There's never a good time with you," Richard said lightly. "I figured I'd start with hello." "You don't get to start anything," Mary shot back. "You disappeared." "I had things going on." "You always did." Richard sighed theatrically, glancing at Nora. "I wanted to see my daughter." Nora's grip tightened. "She doesn't know you," Mary said. "That's not my fault," Richard replied smoothly. "You moved. You changed numbers." "You left," Mary said, each word clipped. "For years," Richard shrugged. "People change." Mary laughed once, humorless. "You don't get to use that excuse now." Thomas watched the exchange, understanding dawning with every word. This wasn't just an awkward reunion. This was a wound reopened. Richard's eyes flicked to Nora again. "She's grown." Nora pressed her face into Thomas's side. "Don't look at her like that," Mary snapped. "I have rights," Richard said, his tone shifting. And there it was, the word that carried weight far beyond its size. Mary went still. "You gave those up," she said. "That's not how the law works," Richard replied. "Biology matters." Thomas felt anger flare, hot and unfamiliar. He had spent his life negotiating with men like Richard, men who spoke calmly while threatening everything that mattered. "This conversation is over," Mary said. Richard smirked. "We'll see." He turned and walked away, unhurried, like someone who knew he'd planted something dangerous and didn't need to watch it grow. Mary stood frozen, long after he was gone. Nora looked up at Thomas, eyes glossy. "Is he bad?" Thomas crouched in front of her. "He's someone from your mom's past," he said carefully, "but you're safe." Mary swallowed hard. "We need to go." The drive home was quiet. Mary barely spoke, and Nora stared out the window, silent in a way that felt wrong on her. When they reached Mary's place, Thomas lingered by the car. "If you need anything—" "I know," Mary said quickly. Too quickly. "Thank you for today." He nodded, sensing the walls going back up. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived. Mary stared at it from her kitchen table, heart pounding. She didn't need to open it to know, but she did anyway. Her hands shook as she read the words. Petition for custody. The past hadn't just returned. It had declared war. Mary didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, listening to the soft rhythm of Nora's breathing from the next room, staring at the ceiling as the words from the envelope replayed over and over in her mind. Petition for custody. She had read it 3 times, slowly, carefully, as if reading it enough times might change the meaning. It didn't. Richard was officially asking the court for partial custody of a child he had abandoned for almost 6 years. Mary pushed herself out of bed and went to the kitchen, moving quietly so she wouldn't wake Nora. The envelope sat on the table where she'd left it, thick and heavy, like it carried actual weight. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands trembling. "I can do this," she told herself. She'd been telling herself that for years. She'd done everything alone. Diapers, night fevers, school forms, doctor visits, jobs she hated but kept because they paid just enough. She'd built a life on exhaustion and determination, on never asking for help because help always came with conditions. But this felt different. This wasn't about working harder. This was about a system that cared more about signatures and bank statements than bedtime stories and scraped knees. Mary sank into the chair and picked up the papers again. Richard's lawyer was expensive. The letterhead alone screamed money. Words like rights, entitlement, and best interest of the child jumped off the page like accusations. Her chest tightened. She opened her laptop and started searching. Family custody lawyer near me. Custody battle costs. How much does a custody lawyer charge? Each result made her stomach drop further. Consultation fees, retainers, court costs, filing fees, numbers stacked on numbers she didn't have. Mary closed the laptop and pressed her palms to her eyes. For the first time since Richard had walked into the park, panic broke through her control. She wasn't afraid of losing an argument. How she was afraid of losing her daughter. Thomas noticed the change immediately. Mary canceled their usual park meetup with a vague excuse, then another. Her texts grew shorter, careful, distant. Nora still sent him voice notes, quick updates about school, about a duck she'd named Captain Beak, but even those felt quieter somehow. Something was wrong. Thomas sat in his office staring at his phone, unread emails piling up on his screen. He thought about Mary's face at the park, the way her body had instinctively moved between Richard and Nora, the fear she hadn't voiced but hadn't been able to hide either. He stood abruptly, grabbed his jacket, and walked out. That afternoon, Thomas made a call he hadn't expected to make again. "I need family law," he told his assistant. "The best." Within hours, he was sitting across from a senior partner at one of the most aggressive family law firms in the state. "I don't want my name involved," Thomas said. "Not yet." The lawyer studied him. "You're asking us to represent someone who hasn't contacted us." "I know." "And you'll cover all expenses." "Yes." The lawyer leaned back. "That could complicate things." Thomas's jaw tightened. "So does a child being uprooted by a man who walked away. Make it work." By the end of the meeting, papers were in motion. Thomas told himself he was doing the right thing. He told himself he was protecting Nora. He told himself Mary would understand. Mary found out 2 days later. The call came while Nora was at school. "Ms. Baker?" the woman on the line said warmly. "This is Claire Hargreaves from Hargreaves and Nolan Family Law." Mary's heart skipped. I didn't contact a law firm." "Yes," the woman said gently. "We were retained on your behalf." Mary stood slowly. "By who?" There was a pause. "I believe Thomas Bennett." The room went silent. Mary's grip tightened around the phone. "No," she said. "That's not possible." "Our firm has received full payment for your case," Claire continued. "All filings, court appearances, preparation. Everything is covered." Mary felt heat rise to her face. She hung up without another word. Her chest burned. Her thoughts raced. Thomas Bennett. Not just Thomas. Not the man who laughed with Nora over marshmallows. Not the one who sat on park benches, pretending ducks were terrifying creatures. The billionaire. The truth slammed into place with brutal clarity. The tailored clothes. The ease. The way people deferred to him without realizing why. How she sank into the chair, anger flooding in behind the shock. He hadn't told her. He had decided for her. Mary grabbed her keys. Thomas was in the cafe where it had all begun, sitting at their usual table, when she walked in. He looked up and froze. Mary's expression was unreadable. Her eyes were sharp, hurt simmering just beneath the surface. "We need to talk," she said. "Mary. Now." They stepped outside. The afternoon sun felt harsh, exposing everything. "You paid a law firm," she said flatly. Thomas exhaled. "Yes." "You're a billionaire," she continued, voice shaking despite her effort to keep it steady. "Yes." "You lied to me." "I didn't lie," he said carefully. "I didn't tell you everything." Her laugh was bitter. "That's the same thing. I was trying to help." "You decided I needed saving," Mary shot back, "without asking me." "I decided Nora needed protection." Mary stepped closer. "Don't you dare use my child to justify going behind my back." Thomas met her gaze, his voice low. "You were drowning." "And you thought money would fix that?" "It fixes systems that don't care about fairness," he replied. "I've seen it work." Mary shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "You took my choice away." "That was never my intention." "But it was the result," she said. "I trusted you." The word landed hard. Thomas swallowed. "I didn't want you to feel indebted." "And now I feel controlled," Mary said quietly. They stood there, the cafe's soft music drifting through the open door behind them, mocking the moment. Nora's voice echoed in Thomas's head. "Are we keeping him?" Mary stepped back. "I can't do this," she said. "Not like this." She turned and walked away, leaving Thomas standing alone, realizing that the most expensive mistake he'd ever made had nothing to do with money at all. And this time, no amount of it could fix what he'd broken. Mary didn't go home right away. She drove past her apartment, past the school, past the grocery store where Nora liked to pick cereal based on the cartoon character on the box. She drove until the city thinned and the streets grew quieter, until she could breathe without feeling like her chest was collapsing inward. She parked, turned off the engine, and sat there gripping the steering wheel. "I trusted you." The words replayed in her head, louder each time. She had trusted Thomas because he hadn't felt powerful, because he had listened. That's because he'd laughed when Nora teased him and never tried to impress either of them, because he'd sat at a small table and eaten dinner like he belonged there, not above it. And all along, he had known something she didn't. The phone buzzed. "Thomas. Please, let me explain." Mary stared at the screen, then tossed the phone onto the passenger seat like it burned. That night, Nora sensed everything. Mary tried to keep things normal, pasta for dinner, homework at the table, a cartoon before bed. But Nora watched her with too much attention. "You're mad," Nora said finally. Mary paused mid-dish. "I'm just tired." Nora tilted her head. "You say that when you don't want to explain things." Mary closed her eyes. "Is it about Thomas?" Nora asked softly. Mary turned, leaning against the counter. "Why do you think that?" "Because when you're mad at the world, you hum," Nora said. "But when you're mad at a person, you go quiet." Mary felt her throat tighten. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. Did he make a mistake? Yes. Is he still nice? Mary hesitated. Too long. Nora's shoulders drooped. "I like him." "I know, sweetheart." "Did he lie to us?" Mary swallowed. "He didn't tell us everything." Nora frowned. "That's lying." Mary didn't correct her. That night Nora cried herself to sleep. Mary sat on the edge of the bed long after, brushing hair back from her daughter's face, guilt and anger tangling inside her until she couldn't tell which hurt more. Thomas didn't sleep either. He replayed the confrontation over and over, the way Mary's eyes had hardened, or the way she had stepped back like she needed distance from him physically, not just emotionally. He hadn't meant to control anything, but intent didn't erase impact. The next morning he showed up anyway. Mary opened the door and froze. "Please," Thomas said quietly. 5 minutes. Mary's jaw tightened. "This isn't a negotiation." "I know," he said. I just need to tell you the truth." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Nora's at school." "I know." They stood in the living room, the space suddenly too small for everything unspoken between them. "I didn't tell you who I was because I wanted to be seen as myself," Thomas began. "Not what I own." Mary crossed her arms. "You don't get credit for hiding power while still using it. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything. And yet you paid for my entire legal defense." "I did that because the system is broken," he said. "Because Richard has money and confidence and no conscience, and because you shouldn't have to lose sleep wondering if love is enough." Mary laughed sharply. "Love is enough." "Not in court," Thomas said. "That doesn't give you the right to decide for me." "I wasn't deciding for you," he insisted. "I was standing beside you." "No," Mary said. "You were standing in front of me." Silence fell. Thomas rubbed a hand over his face. "I grew up watching people get crushed because they didn't have leverage," he said. "I promised myself I'd never be powerless again." Mary's voice softened, just a fraction. "And I promised myself I'd never depend on someone who could walk away." "I'm not walking away." "You already crossed a line," she replied. "What's to stop you from crossing another when you think you know better?" The question hung between them, heavy and unresolved. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. Mary shook her head. "That hesitation? That's why I can't do this." Nora's backpack sat by the door. Mary picked it up and held it to her chest like armor. "I have to show her that we don't get saved," Mary said. "We stand on our own." Thomas's voice broke. "And if standing alone costs you everything?" Mary met his gaze, tears finally spilling free. "Then at least it will be my choice." That afternoon, Nora didn't run toward Thomas's name when she got home. She asked once, quietly, then didn't ask again. Thomas sent one message. "Dear Thomas, I'm here, if you need anything." Mary typed a response, deleted it. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table with the custody papers spread out in front of her, pen in hand. She dialed the law firm. "Thank you for your assistance," she said evenly, "but I won't be needing your services." The voice on the other end sounded surprised. "Ms. Baker, are you sure?" "Yes," Mary said. "I'll represent myself if I have to." She hung up and exhaled shakily. Nora appeared in the doorway. "Are we still friends with Thomas?" Mary pulled her into a hug. "Not right now." Nora nodded against her shoulder. "Okay." Mary stared at the paperwork long after Nora went to bed. She didn't know how she would win. She only knew she couldn't win by leaning on someone else's power. As the house fell silent, Mary made her decision. She would face Richard. She would face the court, and she would do it alone. Mary learned quickly that fear didn't arrive all at once. It crept in. It slipped between grocery lists and lunchbox notes, between laundry cycles and late-night budgeting. It settled into her shoulders while she waited on hold with legal aid offices, into her jaw when she read court documents she barely understood, into her chest when Nora asked questions Mary didn't yet know how to answer. The court date was circled on the calendar in red. Every time Mary passed it, her stomach tightened. She spent evenings at the kitchen table with stacks of paper spread out like a battlefield. School records, medical forms, old emails she'd saved more out of habit than hope. She highlighted. She underlined. She Googled phrases like parental fitness and burden of proof until the words blurred together. Some nights she cried quietly into her hands. Other nights she didn't cry at all, and that scared her more. "You're doing great," Nora said one evening, peeking at the papers. "You look like a detective." Mary smiled weakly. "I feel like I'm pretending to be one." Nora climbed into her lap. "You always figure things out." Mary held her tighter than usual. "Not always." "But you try," Nora said simply. "That counts." Mary closed her eyes. Richard didn't wait for the courtroom to make his presence felt. The emails started first, polite on the surface, sharp underneath. "I just want what's fair. I think it's best if we keep this civil. The court will want to see cooperation." Then came the text messages. "You don't want to drag Nora through this. I'm offering compromise. You should think about what's best for her future." Each message landed like a threat disguised as concern. One afternoon, Mary found him waiting near the school gates. Her heart jumped into her throat. Richard smiled as if they were old acquaintances. "I won't keep you," he said smoothly. "Just wanted to check in." Mary positioned herself closer to Nora. "You're not allowed to be here." "I'm allowed to talk," he replied. "For now." Nora clutched Mary's coat. "Mom?" "It's okay," Mary said, though it didn't feel like it. Richard leaned in slightly. "You know this doesn't have to get ugly." "It already is," Mary said. He straightened. "I've got a good lawyer, the kind judges listen to." Mary met his gaze. "So do I. Even if I'm not paying for one." His smile faltered, just for a second. "That's brave," Richard said. Or reckless." Mary didn't respond. She walked away with Nora, every step heavy but deliberate. At night, doubt crept in. Mary lay awake wondering if she was doing the right thing, if pride had pushed her into a corner she couldn't fight her way out of. She imagined the courtroom, the judge's expression, Richard's lawyer picking apart her life like it was a checklist. What if love wasn't enough? What if effort didn't matter? What if she lost? She turned onto her side and stared at the wall, heart pounding. I can't fail her. Thomas watched everything from a distance. He didn't text. He didn't show up uninvited. He respected the boundary Mary had drawn, even when it felt like it was cutting him in two. But he didn't disappear. He spoke quietly to a retired judge he trusted, asking general questions, nothing that crossed a line. He arranged for an independent child psychologist to be on standby, just in case Mary needed one. He ensured the law firm he'd hired remained available, even after Mary declined their services. He did it all without attaching his name, without stepping forward, without asking for credit. Some evenings he sat in his car across the street from Mary's building, engine off, lights dark, just close enough to feel connected, far enough to honor her choice. Once he saw Nora wave at a passing bus and wondered if she still thought of him when she saw marshmallows or ducks. The thought nearly broke him. 2 nights before court, Mary finally cracked. She stood in the shower, letting the water run too hot, tears mixing with steam as her breath hitched. She pressed her forehead to the tile and whispered, "I don't know if I'm strong enough." No one answered. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, she noticed an envelope slid halfway under the door. Her heart raced. Inside was a neatly organized folder. Tabs, notes, copies. At the top, a handwritten card. For clarity, not control. Use what helps, ignore what doesn't. No signature. Mary sank onto the couch. She flipped through the folder slowly, recognition dawning. This wasn't a lawyer's intimidation. It wasn't a demand. It was support. Quiet, careful, respectful. Her eyes burned. She didn't reach for her phone. But for the first time in days, she slept. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and still. Mary dressed carefully, not to impress, but to steady herself. Nora wore her favorite sweater, the blue one with the tiny stars. "Do I have to talk?" Nora asked softly. Mary knelt. "Only if you want to. And you won't be alone." Nora nodded, brave, but small. They stepped outside. Across the street, Thomas stood beside his car, hands in his pockets. He didn't approach. He didn't wave. He just met Mary's eyes and nodded once, steady, grounding. Mary hesitated. Then she nodded back. As they walked toward the courthouse, its stone facade looming ahead, Mary felt the weight of everything she'd built, everything she might lose, and everything she was fighting for pressed down on her shoulders. She took a breath. The doors opened, and the courtroom awaited. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. Mary noticed it immediately, the way her senses sharpened when fear tried to take over. The wooden benches creaked as people shifted. Shoes echoed against tile. Somewhere, a clock ticked too loudly, so she held Nora's hand, grounding herself in the small warmth of her daughter's fingers. Across the room, Richard sat with his lawyer, posture relaxed, suit crisp. He looked confident in the way people do when they believe the system already favors them. Mary refused to look away. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The room settled into tense silence as the case was called. Mary felt her heart hammer as Richard's lawyer spoke first. He talked about biological rights, about reconnection, about how absence does not erase parenthood. Mary clenched her jaw. Then it was her turn. She stood slowly, knees threatening to buckle, but her voice, when it came, was steady. She spoke about Nora's first steps, her fevers, the nights spent awake worrying about bills and futures and whether she was enough. She spoke about waiting. It's about unanswered calls, about birthdays spent explaining why some people just don't show up. Richard shifted in his seat. Mary didn't look at him. She looked at the judge. "I never stopped the door from being open," Mary said quietly. "He just never walked through it." Evidence followed. School records, medical forms with only one parent listed, emails sent and never answered, years documented in ink and dates. Richard's lawyer tried to interrupt. The judge raised a hand. Richard took the stand next. He spoke smoothly at first, about regret, about growth, about wanting a second chance. But under questioning, the cracks showed. Missed child support payments. Addresses changed without notice. No attempts at contact. When asked why now, Richard hesitated. The pause was loud. Nora was not called to testify, and the judge made that decision quickly. When the ruling came, it was firm. Full custody remained with Mary Baker. Richard would be granted supervised visitation only. Conditional, gradual, earned. Mary's breath left her all at once. The gavel struck. It was over. Outside the courtroom, the world rushed back in. Voices, footsteps, life continuing like nothing monumental had just happened. Mary made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. She leaned against the wall, breath shaking, tears spilling freely now that she didn't have to be strong anymore. Nora hugged her tightly. They had won. And for the first time since the envelope arrived, Mary let herself cry. The relief didn't arrive the way Mary expected. It didn't burst through her like sunlight or lift her off the ground, and it didn't erase the fear or stitch the weeks of tension neatly back together. It arrived quietly, heavy, almost, settling into her bones like exhaustion finally allowed to exist. The day after court, Mary slept through her alarm. That never happened. She woke to sunlight pooling on the bedroom wall, heart racing as she reached for her phone. Then remembered. No emergency, no paperwork, no court date looming like a shadow. She lay back down and stared at the ceiling. We won! The words felt fragile, like they might crack if she said them too loudly. In the kitchen, she made coffee and forgot to drink it. She stood at the sink longer than necessary, staring out the window, her body unsure what to do now that it wasn't in survival mode. Nora padded in wearing socks that didn't match. "Is today normal?" she asked. Mary turned. "What do you mean? Like, do we still worry?" Mary crouched and pulled her into a hug. "We're safe." Nora nodded, but her body didn't fully relax. Later, Mary noticed the signs she hadn't seen before, or maybe hadn't had the space to notice. Nora flinched when the doorbell rang. She asked twice if Richard knew where they lived. She wanted the nightlight back on, even though she'd outgrown it years ago. Victory had come with bruises you couldn't see. That night, as Mary tucked Nora into bed, Nora asked quietly, "He can't take me, right?" "No," Mary said firmly. "No one can." Nora nodded, reassured, but still afraid. After she fell asleep, Mary sat on the edge of the bed and cried again, softer this time. Thomas watched the courthouse steps empty from across the street. He didn't approach. He didn't celebrate. He saw Mary break down. He just saw Nora cling to her, saw the release ripple through them both, and felt the strange ache of being relieved and unnecessary at the same time. This was what Mary had wanted, to stand on her own. And she had. He drove home and sat alone in a penthouse that felt too big, too quiet. He replayed everything, the dinner, the walks, the laughter, the rupture. He wondered if he had done the right thing by stepping back, or if restraint now felt too much like abandonment. He didn't text. He didn't call. Days passed. Mary returned to routines that felt both comforting and unfamiliar. School drop-offs, work shifts, grocery lists, life reasserting itself. People congratulated her. "You're so strong," they said. She smiled politely, even when the words felt hollow. At night, she sat with a mug of tea she forgot to finish and stared at her phone. Thomas's name sat there, unmoving. She thought about the folder he'd left, the way he had supported without stepping forward, the look they'd shared outside the courthouse, quiet, mutual, unresolved. She was grateful. She was angry. She was tired. And she missed him. On the 5th night after court, Nora brought it up. "Are you still mad at Thomas?" Mary paused mid-dish. "Why?" "Because you haven't talked about him," Nora said. "You talk about things when you're not mad. When you're mad, you pretend they don't exist." Mary turned off the tap. "I don't want to depend on him," Mary said carefully. Nora considered that. Depending isn't the same as needing. Mary blinked. "Where did you hear that?" Nora shrugged. "You told me once, when I didn't want help with my math homework." Mary laughed softly, surprised. "I think," Nora continued, "that he helped because he cared, not because he wanted to win." Mary closed her eyes. That night, after Nora fell asleep, Mary sat on the couch and picked up her phone. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed, "I don't know where we stand, but I want to talk." She hovered over the send button, and finally, pressed it. Some victories don't feel like endings. Sometimes they feel like doors reopening, slowly, carefully, into something new. The cafe hadn't changed. The same uneven wooden tables. The same soft hum of conversation layered over clinking cups. The same window that caught the afternoon light just right, warming the brick wall like it remembered better days. Mary arrived early. She chose the table by the window without thinking, then realized she always had. She wrapped her hands around a mug she hadn't ordered yet, nerves buzzing beneath her skin. The bell above the door chimed, and for a heartbeat she looked up, breath caught, only to relax again when it wasn't him. "You asked for this," she reminded herself. "You asked to talk." When Thomas finally walked in, the room felt smaller. He paused just inside the doorway, scanning until his eyes found her. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he crossed the room slowly, like he wasn't sure the ground would hold. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Mary replied. They sat. Silence stretched. Not awkward exactly, but careful. Like both of them were testing whether old wounds still hurt when touched. "I'm glad you came," Thomas said. "I didn't know if you would," Mary admitted. "I would have come anywhere," he said quietly. "Any time." Mary swallowed. A server appeared, saving her from responding. Coffee for Thomas. Tea for Mary. Hot chocolate for Nora, who arrived a moment later, bursting through the door like joy itself had been bottled and released. "There you are," Nora announced, running straight to Thomas and hugging him around the waist. Thomas laughed softly, startled but relieved, and hugged her back. "Hey, Star Sweater." Mary watched the exchange, her chest tightening in a way that hurt and healed at the same time. Nora climbed into the chair between them, swinging her legs. "So, are we friends again?" Mary opened her mouth. Thomas answered first. We're talking." Nora nodded, satisfied. "That's good. Talking fixes most things." Mary smiled despite herself. When Nora's drink arrived, which she immediately focused on arranging marshmallows into what she declared was a very serious scientific pattern, the adults took the opportunity to speak. "I'm sorry," Thomas said, not hesitating. "Not for helping, but for how I did it, for taking your choice away." Mary studied him. "I know why you did it." "That doesn't make it right." "No," she agreed, "but it makes it human." He exhaled, tension easing just a little. "I grew up alone in crowded rooms," Thomas said. "People everywhere, but no one really there. I learned early that money filled silence, but it didn't fill loneliness." Mary listened, really listened. "When I met you," he continued, "I didn't feel like I had to perform. I didn't feel like I was being measured. I felt ordinary, and it terrified me how much that mattered." Mary's voice was soft. "You're not ordinary." "I know," he said. "But with you, I wanted to be." She looked down at her tea. "I'm afraid of imbalance," she said. "Of waking up one day and realizing I've leaned too hard on someone who has more power than I do." "I don't want power over you," Thomas said. "I want partnership. And I know trust doesn't grow where fear lives." Mary met his gaze. "I'm attracted to you," she admitted. "But attraction isn't enough when there's history and hurt, and a child watching every move." Nora looked up. "I am watching." They both laughed, quietly, gratefully. Thomas reached for Mary's hand, then stopped short, giving her the choice. She took it. The contact was gentle, intentional. "I don't need an answer today," Thomas said, "or tomorrow. I just needed you to know that I'm here. Not to save you. I'm not to lead you, but to walk with you, if you'll let me." Mary squeezed his hand, eyes shining. "I don't know what comes next." "That's okay," he said. "Neither do I." Nora finished her drink and looked between them. "So, are we keeping the table?" Mary laughed, tears slipping free. "We're sitting at it." Thomas smiled. When they left the cafe, the sun was lower, the light softer. Outside they stood for a moment, close but not touching, the city moving around them. Mary didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. And for now that was enough. The restaurant looked different the second time. Not because the lighting had changed, or because the tables were arranged any differently, but because Thomas Bennett walked in without expecting anything from it. No validation, no recognition, no special treatment, just dinner. Mary noticed it immediately. They stood near the entrance, Nora between them, clutching a folded piece of paper she'd insisted on bringing. The host greeted them with a polite smile and asked for their name. "Bennett," Thomas said evenly. The host checked the screen. "Right this way." No hesitation, no reverence, just routine. Thomas exhaled as they were led to a table near the window. It wasn't the table, it was who was sitting at it. Dinner unfolded easily, comfortably, in the way things only do when you stop trying to control them. Nora talked about school and ducks, and how she'd decided Captain Beak needed a girlfriend. Mary laughed more than she had in weeks. Thomas listened more than he spoke, watching the two of them with a quiet focus that felt reverent. At one point, Mary caught him staring. "What?" she asked. Thomas shook his head slightly. "I spent years thinking success was measured by how many people waited for me to arrive." "And now?" Mary asked. "And now," he said softly, "I think it's measured by who waits with you." Mary didn't answer right away. She thought about the courtroom, the fear, the folder under the door, the space Thomas had given her even when it cost him. "I still need my independence," she said finally. "I wouldn't want you without it," Thomas replied. Nora raised her hand. "I vote yes to whatever this conversation is." They both laughed. Later, as dessert arrived, chocolate cake Nora declared life-changing. Mary leaned back in her chair, watching Thomas help Nora cut her slice into precise, serious portions. She saw the man he was becoming. Not a billionaire stripped of wealth, but a man learning that wealth was never the point. Outside, the night air was warm and familiar. They didn't rush to leave. Mary stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed loosely, Nora skipping in small circles nearby. "I'm choosing trust," Mary said, "but not surrender." Thomas nodded. "That's all I could ever ask." Nora stopped spinning. "Does this mean we get more dinners?" Mary smiled. "It means we keep choosing the table." Nora beamed. "Good, I like this one." Thomas looked at Mary then, not with expectation, not with pressure, but with something steadier. Hope. Mary reached for his hand, not because she needed him, but because she wanted him there. And that made all the difference. Some invitations change an evening, others change a life. And sometimes the most powerful invitation isn't to a restaurant, it's into someone's life. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more powerful, heartwarming stories like this one.